someone in person who I've seen on TV. You didn't get the feeling that it was like a big groundswell of Chris Christie energy as much as mild curiosity. And then some independent voters, I mean, his campaign's theory of the case here is, yeah, we're not going to win Republicans, but we could win independent voters who can vote in the Republican primary.
The political action committees affiliated with him spent money to try to induce Democrats to unregister, become undeclared voters, thereby permitting them to vote in the Republican primary as that deadline approached. And the numbers did not suggest that a disproportionate number of folks did unregister to allow them to vote in the Republican primary, but there are a lot of independents, and given the absence of a competitive primary on the Democratic side, and given the Trump effect, independents who do tend to have some sort of ideological persuasion one way or the other, regardless of their calling themselves independents, they may be more of a factor than they typically are. And you have to go back to 2012, the last time there was a Republican primary and a non-competitive Democratic primary, and in that primary as many independents voted on the Republican side as Republicans, essentially. So we may be in a circumstance like that, which could give hope to non-Trump candidates, but right now that appears to be their hope, according to the polls.
Josh, is it fair to say that New Hampshire could once again be affected by the outcome in the Iowa caucuses? Donald Trump also leads there, but there's room for a number two, and if somebody else has a good night in Iowa, that could change maybe some of the calculations of these independent voters or whatever other calculations are being made in New Hampshire.
Well, certainly Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis and their supporters hope that's the case. Haley, this is a very sort of gut level reaction and sort of anecdotally. I mean, she seems to be at the moment the most poised to reap the benefit of a performance in Iowa that exceeds expectations. I mean, there is momentum for her on the ground. There are lots of, at her events, she often makes a point of asking, is anyone here for the first time? And, at a recent event, there are a lot of people here for the first time. Part of that is just, this is the time of year when voters really start paying attention, particularly more casual ones. But she remains somebody that voters likely to vote in the Republican primary who haven't seen her are still curious about.
Tim, there is technically a New Hampshire Democratic primary, but it doesn't ultimately matter because President Biden is not taking part in the New Hampshire primary. Democrats have declared South Carolina would be their first primary in a Biden attempt to remake the calendar, but there are Democrats running. Marianne Williamson, Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips, they are campaigning there.
And 19 other people.
I mean, does the Democratic primary matter, and if so, why?
Well, if you ask Dean Phillips, who I spent some time with on Friday, it does matter, and the reason it matters is he feels that Joe Biden is historically weak for an incumbent president, and if Dean Phillips, and his whole strategy is that he will pull off a win in New Hampshire, in a state where the incumbent president isn't on the ballot, and that will then produce conversation.
My contention is on January 24th, that morning after, I think the headlines are going to say, wow, 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 wow. Things changed a little last night, and we got a race.
And his idea is that he will get the headlines out of New Hampshire, and then people will pay attention to who he is and the case that he's making, which isn't that Joe Biden is a bad president. He fully supports Biden's policies and everything he's done as president, but that it's time for a new generation. And it's a stretch.
Sure.
It's a big stretch.
But let me put it this way, though. There are some people advocating to have a Biden write-in campaign for the primary. Does that sort of signal that maybe there is some concern among Biden world that something happening in New Hampshire could be embarrassing for the president or ding him? And frankly, his popularity isn't all that high to begin with.
Well, so Biden world may not be the right answer here because basically New Hampshire's Democratic Party is in a fight with the National Democratic Party and the incumbent president isn't on the ballot. But there is now, and Josh can speak to this too, but there is now this write-in Biden effort, which is pretty shoestring at the moment, though a super PAC has been formed that is separate from the more shoestring grassroots, they like to say, effort. But what they're trying to organize to do right now is have at least one person with a sign that says "Write in Biden" at every single polling place in New Hampshire, because they have to not just get people to write in Joe Biden, they also have to get Democrats to even come out and vote in a primary where the incumbent president isn't on the ballot.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
This message comes from NPR-sponsored Charles Schwab. Seeking clarity in your financial journey? Schwab makes it easy for you to be an informed investor with transparent pricing, low costs, and no fee to work with a financial consultant. Schwab clearly explains their fees and helps you understand the common costs you can incur based on recommendations from your financial consultant. Visit schwab.com or swing by one of their 400 local branches to learn more. This message comes from NPR sponsor Total Wine & More. This holiday season, find the best gifts for everyone on your list when you shop at Total Wine & More. Discover standout gifts for everyone on your list, from wines and tequilas to gift baskets and sets. Explore more in-store, online, or on the Total Wine app. Spirits not available in Virginia or North Carolina. Drink responsibly. B21.
This message comes from NPR sponsor BetterHelp. Whether or not your family gives gifts during the holidays, you get to define how you give to yourself, and the holidays are a great time to do that. So whether it's by starting therapy, going easier on yourself during the tough moments, or treating yourself to a day of complete rest, remember to give yourself some love this holiday season. Be number one on your gift list this year with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/NPR today to get 10% off your first month.
And we're back, and Tim, you just got back from a reporting trip in New Hampshire where you went and attended one of the lesser-known candidate forums. Tell us about that. What'd you learn?
Oh, it is the lesser-known candidate forum.
Capital T.
Yes. So, as we discussed, there are a lot of people actually running for president in New Hampshire. In a lot of states, the bar to entry is very high. You have to gather a lot of signatures. In New Hampshire, you basically need $1,000 and the ability to get to the Secretary of State's office. And as a result, there are a lot of people who are running for president. And you know, what I learned through going to this event, it has been happening for 50 years, and you know, it's something of a sideshow, to say the least. But are the people that are showing up there voters who are actually considering these folks, or is it a bit of that political tourism that is really well known in the early states? Oh, the audience was a combination of what I would say is political tourism and family members of the people running for president.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are a number of people who earnestly are running, but I mean, it tends to be a high percentage of repeat candidates, and you know, maybe it's how politics ought to be, but maybe not.
It is this beautiful combination of absolute earnest. They woke up in the morning, they thought, you know, like, I could be president, I should be president. And I think of a man named Donald Picard, who in his opening statement said this.
When I began this rather quixotic journey a few months ago, I had as a stretch goal that I would be participating in a presidential debate. And here I am. Wow.
And then there's performance art. I don't think there's any other way to describe it. Somebody like Paperboy Love Prince, who I thought was dressed like a genie, but he told me that the big poofy red sleeves he was wearing, along with a Game Boy around his neck, were meant to signify love and a heart. But he was okay with the genie idea because he said, you know, I'm here to grant wishes, maybe. And then there's Vermin Supreme.
Vermin Supreme will take away your guns and give you better ones. And these better guns will shoot marshmallows, but they will still be lethal.
Josh, I don't know how long he's been running for president.
A very long time.
A very long time.
Well, he wears a boot on his head. He often talks about, and sometimes campaigns alongside a miniature pony. I don't know, he's run at least 4 or 5 times, and he lives in Massachusetts. And, you know, the bar of entry is low, and there's no indication that he's going to stop running.
Josh, as you said, though, it's like there's something about this that's like sort of time-honored, sort of endearing, but to me it almost feels like a bit of a throwback kind of event when politics was maybe more joyful, or politics has been so dark, frankly, in recent years. Like these kind of candidate forums almost seem out of place with our current national political dynamic.
Well, I think that's correct. I also think it's true that a lot of things about the New Hampshire primary, I've come to see them as reflections of what New Hampshire wants to tell itself about its primary. And, the Secretary of State's office, former Secretary of State Bill Gardner, current Secretary of State David Scanlon, like to say New Hampshire is a place where anyone can run for president and realize their childhood dream. And, this event is the embodiment and reflection of that.
Yeah, anyone can run, but not anyone can win. And, honestly, there have been a lot of really good people who have run for president and have not had a chance.
Well, that's something these fringe people will tell you. They'll tell you when the actual tally comes out, see, I got as many votes as Mike Pence or whomever was once a politician who was at least consequential somewhere who tanks it in the primary here.
I'm curious to ask you both if you get a sense of where New Hampshire voters are about the importance of the primary in presidential politics. And by that I mean, I know that the state party is fighting with the DNC and the power structures, I understand the state law, all of that. But just regular voters, did they bring it up to you? Are they very vested in this identity of New Hampshire as the first primary state? Or can you see it sort of moving away from them, particularly in the Democratic Party, which is trying to diversify its calendar?
Well, I do think that polling does show that it's more important to older voters. Republicans are more into it than Democrats. I do think there is a generational thing, and the farther we get from primaries where it was really wide open, where our politics weren't quite so national and sort of digital in terms of everybody knowing everything immediately, and the notion of special things happening in New Hampshire or Iowa fades a bit. I do think that the notion of people wanting to get out and participate in the ways that are traditionally venerated here in New Hampshire, that sense is fading.
I was talking to a group of voters at this lesser-known candidate forum who were last cycle, I had a presidential candidate come to my house to spin dreidel because she was curious about dreidel. And that sort of experience, it can only happen in New Hampshire, but it's not clear that experience is really determining who becomes president of the United States anymore. All right, Josh Rogers from New Hampshire Public Radio, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon. We'll be back in your feeds tomorrow. I'm Susan Davis, I cover politics.
I'm Tamara Keith, I cover the White House.
And thanks for listening to the NPR Politics Podcast.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Made in Cookware. Did you know that many of the most popular dishes in Tom Colicchio's craft restaurant are made in pots and pans? Their carbon steel cookware combines the best of cast iron and stainless clad, gets super hot, and is rugged enough for grills or an open flame. Best of all, Made in is sold online. If you want to take your cooking to the next level, remember what so many great dishes on menus all around the world have in common. They're made in.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Rosetta Stone, the perfect app to achieve your language learning goals, no matter how busy your schedule gets. It's designed to maximize study time with immersive 10-minute lessons and audio practice for your commute. Plus, tailor your learning plan for specific objectives like travel. This holiday season, get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off and unlimited access to 25 language courses. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR.
There's a new way to support this show and public media. Please consider signing up for the NPR Plus podcast bundle. NPR Plus listeners get to unlock sponsor-free shows and bonus episodes. You can find out more at plus.npr.org, and thanks.
For weeks, the University of Pennsylvania president, Liz Magill, has been facing calls for her resignation.
So the pressure on Magill had been building for months, and we had some very outspoken donors. These are not people who donate anonymously. These are folks with their names on buildings across campus.
That's our colleague Melissa Korn, who covers higher education.
And they had been really frustrated with how the school was handling a number of issues, including in response to the October 7th Hamas attack, and felt that the school wasn't taking their concerns seriously about anti-Semitism, and that there needed to be a leadership change.
What was at the heart of this standoff?
The controversy at Penn, it's two things. One is how the school deals with questions regarding free speech and academic freedom and the line between free speech and anti-Semitism. And then the other big issue is what role, what power donors have over how a school runs itself.
And on Saturday afternoon, those donors got what they wanted. McGill resigned. And what would that mean to yield to that kind of demand?
I think that's where some of the more interesting questions about this all come in, right? Who's pulling the strings, right? Do you do whatever a big donor tells you to do because they're a big donor or have been in the past? How much power should they have? And these are all questions that I think Penn and many other universities are grappling with right now.
Welcome to The Journal, our show about money, business, and power. I'm Kate Linebaugh. It's Monday, December 11th. Coming up on the show, anti-Semitism, free speech, and the rising tensions between elite universities and big donors.
This episode is brought to you by ExxonMobil. The world needs ways to reduce carbon emissions. ExxonMobil is working on solutions in its own operations, like carbon capture and clean energy from hydrogen, that could also help in other industries, like manufacturing, commercial transportation, and power generation too, helping deliver heavy industry with low emissions. Find out more at exxonmobil.com.
Liz Magill became president of the University of Pennsylvania in July 2022. She's a constitutional law scholar and had been dean of Stanford Law and provost at the University of Virginia. Since early September, Magill has been facing controversy on campus. Initially, it was related to an event, a Palestinian literary festival.
There was concern about the guest list and that some of the people there would be espousing anti-Semitic ideas. So the donors who were upset, you know, these are Jewish donors. Many of them have ties to other Jewish advocacy organizations. And they said, you know, it seems like anti-Semitism seriously, that you're almost inviting it onto your campus, and this is really troubling, and that they wanted the event to be canceled.
How did Penn president Liz Magill respond?
Magill put out a statement, you know, saying that the university is not condoning anti-Semitism, but there is value to free speech here.
And she put out this statement, but that wasn't the end of things.
Not by a long shot. There was a letter that went around from donors. A number of donors crafted this letter, kind of an open letter opposing the university's decision to move forward with the event.
Were there anti-Semitic incidents happening on campus that these donors were pointing to?
There had been, yes. The Hillel, the Jewish Student Center, had been trashed. There was somebody who was yelling anti-Semitic slurs outside the Hillel. There had been a couple of incidents and general reports of Jewish students saying they felt unsafe, they felt uncomfortable. And, you know, many of the donors saw the entire Palestinian Writers' Festival as an offense to them and student safety and security on campus.
And then, after the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel and Israel's subsequent strikes on Gaza, what happened at Penn?
So McGill issued a statement 3 days after, so on October 10th. It lamented the loss of life by Hamas's attack. It didn't just shrug its shoulders at the barbarity of what happened, but it was a pretty kind of focused on some of the practicalities. Like, here are some support services you can seek out on campus if you feel you need them, and let's remember to be kind to each other right now. And there was almost immediate backlash to that statement.
How so?
There was this concern that it wasn't strong enough. It didn't call Hamas a terrorist organization explicitly. There was also frustration that McGill didn't really acknowledge the loss of life in Gaza, right? The civilian deaths happening there were not called out the same way the civilian deaths in Israel were. So she was getting it from both sides.
McGill's statement failed to assuage tensions with Penn's donors. One of them, a man named Mark Rowan, the CEO of private equity firm Apollo Global Management, wrote an op-ed calling for the resignation of McGill and the president of the board, Scott Bach. And then Rowan took his message onto CNBC.
Over the past 2 weeks, more than 4,000 of our alumni, many of our leaders, many of our trustees, many of our board members have kind of finally said we've had enough, and signed an open letter basically telling President McGill that she was heading in the wrong direction.
And what was happening with students on campus around this time?
There were protests on campus, right? There are always protests of some sort on many college campuses. But these were, there were groups of hundreds of students. It was generally students, pro-Palestinian student groups that were organizing these. And the sense that the kind of mood on campus shifted further with Jewish students saying they felt really uncomfortable, really unsafe. There were reports of a few more anti-Semitic incidents, vandalism, things like that, there was kind of this steady drip of statements from university leaders saying, we are looking into it. Once again, we do not condone anti-Semitism on our campus.
These anti-Semitic incidents on campuses began to draw the attention of lawmakers.
There was a big push in Washington, and state governors put out statements, mayors put out statements, all of that, saying we're very concerned about this. And then you have enough of a push in Washington of people saying these schools are doing something very wrong. So the House Committee on Education and the Workforce arranged a hearing, and they invited the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and Penn to testify.
Why those universities in particular?
Well, they're all very prestigious schools. They are all schools where there have been particular incidents or allegations of anti-Semitism. They're high-profile schools, so when things happen there, everyone notices. So the House Committee on Education and the Workforce arranged a hearing, and the House Committee, which is run by Republicans, made very clear that they were very disappointed in this leadership.
Coming up, how that hearing would tip the balance against McGill.
We've all felt left out. And for people who move to this country, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Due for an oil change? You're in luck. October only. Participating Ohio Jiffy Lube locations are offering a $19.99 conventional oil change. Your oil change comes with an inspection, personalized service review, and full range of service offerings like brakes and tires. Visit your nearest Ohio Jiffy Lube for a $19.99 plus tax Jiffy Lube Signature Service conventional oil change. That's a job for Jiffy.
Set the scene of this hearing.
So you had these women lined up in a row facing the crowd of committee members. Virginia Fox opened the session, and then the questioning began.
Today, each of you will have a chance to answer to and atone for the many specific instances of vitriolic, hate-filled anti-Semitism on your respective campuses.
How did things go?
These hearings they're political events. They're political spectacles often. No matter who's running the hearing, this is an opportunity for politicians to get a few sound bites, to show that they're being tough on a particular issue.
The goal for the presidents is to, get through the hearing.
Yes, the goal is to get through the hearing relatively unscathed if possible. And, they had all worked with lawyers and prepared. This was not a group of people who went in cold. And some argue maybe they were over-prepared because their answers tended to be extremely legalistic.
When did you notice things start to go awry?
So the first half of the hearing, I'd say, was not that spectacular. Elise Stefanik, a Republican from New York, was asking some pretty pointed questions. And then they went on recess because House members had to go vote on a couple of things. And some people felt the hearing was over, right? And then after, I want to say it was an hour, they come back. And that's really when things started to get heated, and that's the part of the hearing that everyone is now focused on.
Here's Elise Stefanik grilling McGill.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
This is when Elise Stefanik started asking the genocide question. And none of the presidents gave an unequivocal yes. They all said something along the lines of, it depends on the context.
I am asking, specifically calling for the genocide of Jews, does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
yes
speech
or no?
If the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
What did you think as you heard that?
I knew what they were trying to say, which is we give people a wide berth in what they're allowed to say on campuses, both inside and outside the classroom, because that sparks discussion and debate and intellectual growth. So yes, it can depend on the context.
That's why it was so hard for them to answer the question.
Exactly. They couldn't answer that question with a hard yes, because it's, hate speech is subject to disciplinary action when it has the threat of imminent violence, or it's directed at an individual. But they were so caught up in the rules part of it and the policy and the precedent and all that, they weren't thinking, wait a sec, I just said maybe we wouldn't punish someone for calling for genocide.
And how did that go down at Penn, which already had these tensions between donors and the school, and McGill in particular?
I had a trustee refer to the testimony last Tuesday as a hand grenade that went off on campus. This just blew things up. Even if this tension had been simmering, the situation became untenable afterwards. There was no coming back from this.
The next night, on Wednesday, McGill sought to walk back her remarks in a video. She said she regretted how she answered the question at the hearing and promised to make changes to Penn's policies.
I was focused on our university's long-standing policies aligned with the U.S. Constitution, which say that speech alone is not punishable. I was not focused on, but I should have been, the irrefutable fact that a call for genocide of Jewish people is a call for some of the most terrible violence human beings can perpetrate.
But her statement fell short, notably to some donors to Penn's business school, Wharton.
The donors were horrified, and you also had one major donor, Ross Stevens, say that he was going to rescind a $100 million gift that he had given back in 2017. because essentially his affiliation with Penn now was doing reputational damage to his own company, and he couldn't have that.
Who is Ross Stevens, and can you rescind a donation?
So Ross Stevens is another finance guy. He is a very wealthy man who is very generous to the institutions that he likes. So he had given money for this new center at Wharton a couple of years back. The center opened, and now he says, that the gift was in the form of stock in his company, and he said he's going to cancel the shares because of all of this.
Is there precedent for that? To withdraw a donation so large?
I haven't seen something like this ever before. Certainly not at this dollar amount.
On Saturday, McGill and board chair Scott Bach both resigned. McGill will stay on until an interim president is named, and she'll remain on faculty after the transition. How has the student body reacted to McGill's resignation?
It's a mix. So there was a big camp saying the school can't back down, the school shouldn't back down, McGill shouldn't step down because that sends a terrible message about prioritizing donors over academia.
Right.
And then there was another camp saying they have to back down because the school is, this could be the first of many rescinded donations. And at what point can you no longer just give back all of your money that you've gotten over the years?
And has her resignation satisfied her critics?
Not sure yet. I think, some of them spent the weekend doing a bit of a victory lap, but they also know that this doesn't solve underlying currents of anti-Semitism that may be on campus and not just Penn's campus. And there's a question of how much power they'll get in deciding who the next president is, right? They might see this as an opportunity to really take a stand and weigh in on who the successor is, and they may feel that they have the authority and the power to do it because this worked.
With McGill resigning now, what's the big question you have?
I think I have a few questions still. One is, who's going to want to take that job, knowing that there's some dysfunction within the board and some frayed relationships with major donors, and also likely some distrust from faculty, many of whom they weren't thrilled with how McGill handled things, but they're worried about what the move means for them, right? Are they going to self-censor now? Are they going to be nervous about what they're allowed to say, and they'll be on the chopping block next? So I'm not sure who wants to take that job. And then I still have questions about what this solves, right? This doesn't make anti-Semitic incidents on campus disappear. This doesn't stop objectionable chants on campus. These things will continue to happen. It's just with someone else sitting in the presidency.
That's all for today, Monday, December 11th. The Journal is a co-production of Spotify and the Wall Street Journal. Additional reporting in this episode by Douglas Belkin, Joseph De Avila, Rachel Louise Ensign, Laura Cusisto, and Peter Loftus. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.
Due for an oil change? You're in luck. October only. Participating Ohio Jiffy Lube locations are offering a $19.99 conventional oil change. Your oil change comes with an inspection, personalized service review, and full range of service offerings like brakes and tires. Visit your nearest Ohio Jiffy Lube for a $19.99 plus tax Jiffy Lube Signature Service conventional oil change. That's a job.